relationship and emotional intelligence specialist. And I'm here with another live stream, and we're going to be talking about communication again, right? We talk about communication, relationships, really helping people to learn how to speak with one another and connect with one another so that they can have the best relationship possible, getting the most intimacy. And the beautiful thing about it is, like I've said in multiple live streams before, that these skills are not just for your relationship. A lot of these skills that we've learned about, how to communicate, how to listen, all those things like that, they can be used anywhere in any relationship, at work, with your kids, on the job, with friends, doesn't matter, right? You can use them anywhere, in church, community, whatever. So that's the beauty of it, right? So even if you're not in a relationship yourself, you could still learn how to communicate the right way and then form deeper bonds with those people in your life that you care about. But without further ado, guys, let's talk about today's topic and what we're going to be going into. So, today's topic, we're going to be talking about hard conversations. But are they really hard? Are there really such things as hard conversations? We're going to be talking about what makes a conversation hard. Like, what do we even mean when we talk about hard conversations? And then we're going to talk about the definition behind that and what are some of the main proponents that make conversations difficult. Because the fact of the matter is, most conversations don't have to be difficult. I would be ignorant to say that every single conversation, no matter if you have all the best communication skills and you do them all the time, that there's no such thing as a hard conversation. That's not true. That's not accurate, right? But we'll get into that though. But I will say this: there are a lot of conversations that we make hard that shouldn't be hard, and we'll talk about what those are. We'll also talk about how we can make conversations easier, even with a difficult topic, right? So, but let's get into it, right? I don't want to waste your time, and I want to make sure you guys are able to get what you need from this live stream. So, what is a hard conversation? What are hard conversations? All right. So, typically, when we think about a hard conversation, there's some of the things, probably the main thing that comes to mind, the number one thing, at least I could think of, is emotional dysregulation. We're concerned about how the other person is going to respond. They're going to yell, they're going to blow up, they're going to make a scene, or they're going to start crying, or maybe they're going to get super anxious, they're going to be insecure, they're going to attack us. We're more so worried about that emotional dysregulation. I would say if we think about any hard conversation, that's probably the number one thing that we're probably concerned about, right? The number one thing, right? Every time I talk to my clients and we talk about having those conversations, the number one thing that comes up is I'm concerned about how they're going to respond. I'm concerned about how they're going to act, and usually it's something that it's explosive, right? Usually not anything on the other end where they're going to start crying or be scared and insecure. It's going to blow up into a big thing. It's going to be a fight. I'm going to get dysregulated. They're going to be dysregulated, and it's going to be this whole thing. And I prefer just not to get into it like that, right? So that's probably the number one reason for hard conversations, the number one thing that makes some conversations hard. I would say the next thing, and this is just, again, this is not empirically studied list or anything like that. This is from my experience, what I've seen. I would say the second thing on the list that makes conversations hard are poor communication skills. We don't know how to talk to one another. We don't know how to listen. We think we're talking about the same thing. We're not. We don't know how to track in a conversation. And so we're just doing our best and hoping things will work out. You might start a conversation off with something small and simple you think it is, and then all of a sudden it blows up into something big, right? So I would say poor communication, that is probably the second reason why we label conversations as hard, right? And so the third thing, which you would think, this would probably be higher on the list, but I would say it's not the top. The third thing is a topic, right? But like I said before, again, this is just my list. I would say the topic is probably the third thing, right? And so, and that's what I was saying in the beginning, right? Are there hard topics to discuss? Absolutely. There are definitely, regardless of what skills you have, with emotion regulation and good communication skills, there are going to be some hard topics, right? Imagine having to come home and you have to have a conversation with your spouse about maybe a job opportunity that's going to take you guys and move you guys across the country, but your spouse has to lose out. They have to lose out on what they're doing there and their connections. That's a no matter how great your communication skills are, no matter how emotionally regulated you are, that's a difficult conversation. Another difficult conversation, you have to admit that you had an affair to your spouse and your spouse had no idea. That's a difficult conversation, right? That's going to be hard. Communication skills or self-regulation, emotional regulation aside, that's going to be difficult, right? So there are some situations, some topics that are going to be naturally difficult regardless. And that's what I was saying in the beginning. There are going to be hard conversations out there. There are, right? So just keeping that in mind. But I would say, but that's actually number 3 on the list. Right. Number 3 on the list. I would say number 4. And this, I'll be honest, this is good personality types. However, I would say that regardless of your personality type, it really more so ties back into the communication skills because some people will chalk it up to, well, that's just how I am. I'm just a blunt person. I just like to tell like it is, or I'm just meek and I don't like to speak up and things like that. And I don't know if that's so much personality as much as it is. There's probably some underlying issues there, and a mix of not necessarily having the proper communication skills there as well. Right. So I wouldn't say so much personality, as much as our experiences that we've had over life that kind of formed our personalities, and we're not really aware of how that affects our communication. That can make conversations difficult. So, for instance, if you're trying to share something with somebody, and let's just say they are stone faced, they're stoic, they don't move a muscle, right? It might seem like that person doesn't care. Maybe they do, but it might seem like they don't. Or their answers are dry. Uh-huh. Yep. I understand. Yep. That might make it difficult to have a conversation with somebody, right? Or if someone's just really highly emotional, which I guess that's more so emotional dysregulation, but let's just say they're really sensitive, right? They're really sensitive. So you communicated the right way, you're emotionally regulated, all those things like that. And maybe they're just really, really in tune with their emotions. So maybe they start breaking down and crying right there. And it's like, bro, there's no other way I could have delivered that message. Right. So that's why I was saying the personality types, but again, we could still learn the skills necessary to communicate properly. So I don't want to give that a full, that's more of an honorable mention of the list, right? It's more of an honorable mention more than a actual reason for hard conversations. Because again, all this is going to tie right back into the emotional dysregulation. It's going to tie right back into poor communication skills, and it's going to tie right back into the topic as well, right? So that's what hard conversations are. That's what typically makes conversations difficult, right? Typically what makes them difficult. But I mean, the question is, does it have to be that way? Do conversations have to be difficult? Do they have to be hard? And the answer is no, they don't. They don't necessarily have to be hard. And a lot of times, I would say more often than not, we make our conversations more difficult than they actually need to be. Because again, either we're emotionally dysregulated or they're emotionally dysregulated, or we don't know how to listen. We don't know the purpose of we don't even know the purpose of why we're even having the conversation. So for example, I'll share this real quick, right? Before we go into how to make conversations easier, right? Because this is something else. Maybe this is another honorable mention as well. And this is, I guess maybe this ties into communication, but a lot of times there's people who are getting into conversations, and instead of trying to share your perspective, you're trying to win. You're trying to win the person over. You're trying to win them to your side. You're trying to prove them wrong and prove yourself right. And if you were debating somebody, then this would be an appropriate way to handle a conversation if you're debating somebody. But when it comes to relationships, interpersonal relationships, it's never a debate, right? You're framing the conversation incorrectly. And a lot of times, again, you're asking for you say you want validation, but what you're really seeking for is agreement. And you cannot force someone to agree with you. The best you could do is share your thoughts, share your perspective, share why you think the way you do about whatever the situation or topic is. And then if the other person is desirous, then they will ask questions. And then if you make a good point, then they might just agree with you. They might come to your side. But some people, maybe they won't. But that's not the purpose of having a conversation between two people, right? The purpose is for us to understand. And so a lot of times we get so caught up with winning and trying to prove our point that we forget what the whole purpose of the conversation is. And that's when you might see people just kind of check out from you. Like you're trying to have a conversation with them, and all of a sudden they're just despondent. They're not really checking. They're just, yeah, no, you're right. You're right. They just agree with you. And then you get mad that they agree with you because they're not really agreeing with you. They just want you to shut up and stop talking. Like it's like they're done with the conversation. And so now you try to prove your point even more, or you try to point out something else, like, oh, see, you don't care. You're not trying to. And it's like, bruh, man, ain't no one trying to get in no debate, bro. Like, ain't no one trying to do that. So you have to understand what the framework of the conversation is. And again, when it comes to interpersonal relationships, it's always understanding it's never a debate. It's not about winning. It's not about who's right. It's about, hey, was I heard? Was I validated? Was I understood? Period. That's it. That's all there is to it. Right? That's it. And so now let's segue into how to make conversations easier. All right, let's segue into that real quick. And there's a few things. I'm not going to go into super depth on this because, again, this is going to tie into a lot of the things I've talked about before, right? But when it comes to making conversations easier, right? And again, not every conversation, there's some that are going to be difficult regardless, right? But give yourself a fighting chance. Give your relationship a fighting chance. Give the conversation a fighting chance by doing these things. First and foremost, listen to understand, not respond. Again, this is not about winning. This is not about trying to get someone over to your side. It's not trying to convince anybody. It's not what it is. I'm just trying to understand you, and I also want to be understood. That's it. Right? Regardless of what the topic is, I just want to be understood. I want to share what's going on with me, and I want to be understood. That's it. That's it. Right? If you go into a conversation and let's say the other person starts it, right? Then your job is just to listen to them and listen to understand and ask questions and move with curiosity. And like, that's what you want to do. You want to make sure you're able to really identify, okay, what exactly are they talking about? What exactly are they going through? What exactly is the message you're trying to convey? What do they want me to know? That's going to make a conversation go much, much, much easier because now the person doesn't feel like they have to fight for the right to have their perspective and have their opinion and have their thoughts and have their feelings, which means it's going to be safe for them, which means it's going to be more comfortable, which means the chances of it being difficult and being hard is going to drop drastically. All right. All right. The second thing, emotional regulation, right? If you are able to regulate your emotions, if your significant other is able to regulate their emotions, or whoever you're dealing with is able to regulate their emotions, and you are too, that makes a conversation much, much easier. Because we know when emotions get out of whack, when we become dysregulated, we then move into fight or flight. That's what we do. We will start attacking back. We'll start having criticism. We'll start showing contempt. We'll start attacking their point of view. We'll start doing all the bad conversation things with ad hominems and straw mans and all types of stuff, trying to prove ourselves right, trying to prove them wrong, trying to deflect. We'll start doing just everything breaks down. Everything breaks down. You got to make sure you are regulated and able to stay regulated in the moment. And if you need help with regulation, I don't think we've talked about grounding strategies and techniques. We'll have to talk about that in another live stream, but, look it up online, right? Grounding, what kind of grounding techniques are there? You could use your senses. I think they have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where it's like 5 things you can see, 3 or 4 things you could touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you could touch, right? I'm sorry, taste. Right. And by doing these techniques, it helps to ground you and keep you in the present, in the moment, right? Keeping you mindful, aware of what's going on, not taking offense to things that you shouldn't be taking offense to, because they weren't meant that way. They wouldn't even come across that way, things of that nature, like a level of mindfulness. But you got to be able to stay emotionally regulated in the conversation. right? Again, the number one reason why people do not want to have certain conversations, why they try to avoid hard conversations, is because they're concerned about the emotional dysregulation that could take place. And some of you pop off a lot faster than other people. And you know, this message might that part right there might just be just for you. And it's okay to own it, but you got to do something to change it because that's not okay. If you're going from 0 to 100, you know, in the beginning of a conversation, that there's something going on there, right? Because guess what? Your lack of ability to regulate your emotions is keeping your significant other from wanting to connect with you. You are literally putting up a wall. And no matter how much you say, well, I'm safe or I care, and you know, I'm just fiery, or I'm just this, or I'm just that, or you just, again, you're trying to throw the personality thing in there. And your personality cannot trump the fact that you are communicating poorly, you are regulating poorly, because these are skills. And it doesn't matter what your personality is, it doesn't matter what culture you're from, it doesn't matter what background you have, it doesn't matter, and none of that stuff matters because it's a skill you can learn. Imagine someone saying, oh, well, because you're from this place, you can't read. Like, what? Or because you're from this family, or you have this skin color, you can't read. Or you'd be like, what are you talking about? You know, of course I can read. Of course I can learn to read. Our kids can learn to read. What are you talking about? It's the exact same thing with emotion regulation and communication skills. There are books out there, there are videos out there are live streams out there. There's all types of resources out there to help you regulate your emotions and communicate properly. So don't use your personality or your past or anything like that as an excuse to not change. If you know that, yeah, no, I go from 0 to 100. I let things build up. I go from 0 to 100. I don't address things. If you know that's you, then do some work to fix it. Because if you're going to have a conversation, you got to be able to emotionally regulate. You have to. It's a must. It's an absolute must. Part of that as well is monitoring your heart rate. Anyone, maybe if you have like a Apple Watch or a heart rate monitor or something like that, you know, part of the Gottman method is one of the things that they say is that if your heart rate goes over a certain beats per minute, like the 100 beats per minute, and that's for your average person untrained, right? For your average untrained person, 100 beats a minute, that's when you know you're escalating, you're getting to the point of no return. Like once you get to that point, you got to stop, you got to ground yourself, you got to breathe. And you can even tell your significant other, like, hey, listen, I need time, right? I'm starting to get escalated. Let me breathe it out. Let me just woosah. Let me ground myself. Let me touch something. Let me do something to bring my heart rate down. Because if my heart rate gets to a certain point, it's kind of like the Hulk, right? I don't know if you guys ever seen the Incredible Hulk movie. I loved how they did that. How his heart rate, once it got over 200 beats a minute, you know, he would go full Hulk, right? And so it's kind of the same thing with us, except we're not at 200, we're at 100. If you're a trained person, if you work out, you run, you do that, and you have a pretty strong heart, then your limit might be lower. You might be like 70 or 80 beats per minute, right? So you could actually monitor it that way. And if it gets to that point, you could get the alert on your watch, you know, and then or in your phone, and then you could take some time. Okay, let me reset and just tell your significant other, like, hey, listen, this is difficult for me right now. Give me a moment so I can reset. Right. But that emotion regulation is key, right? Is key. If I want to have like a catchy phrase, I would say like regulate before you communicate, right? There you go. There's your catchy phrase for the day. All right. All right. And so, and then the last set of, and this kind of goes into listening as well, but, you know, always, for one, take turns, right? If someone's bringing something up, do not try to then have a dual conversation. Well, I'm going to bring up my stuff, and now we're going to talk about two of them at the same time. Like that's not how it works. Think of it like this. You got this idea, right? Imagine you're at the grocery store, and you know, you're at the cash register. Now, would you want the cash register or the cashier? Would you want them to ring up your stuff and the other person's stuff at the same time and then try to figure it out at the end and figure it out along the way? You wouldn't want that. Why wouldn't you want that? Well, because there's my stuff that I want to pay for. I make sure there's no mistake there. And that's their stuff they got to pay for. I want to make sure there's no mistake there. Oh, so you get the concept then. You understand that, oh, it makes sense to deal with one thing at a time, because if we deal with one thing at a time, then it's a lot easier to understand and clarify and validate and empathize and deal with that one thing at a time. So then stop making excuses like, oh, I just want to have two conversations at the same time. I want to bring up my stuff as you bring up your stuff. No, you don't do that in real life anywhere else, right? You don't do that anywhere else. You're not at the gas pump, pumping your gas, and then the other person's pumping their gas, and then let's split up, and then you don't do that. You understand one at a time. Same thing they taught us when we were in school, right? Grade school. One person at a time. One person at the water fountain at a time. You don't want two mouths drinking at the water fountain at the same time. That concept, it reverberates through every area of our life. I don't know why in communication, why in our relationships, we then throw everything out the window like we don't know what the heck we're doing, right? So taking turns, whoever brings up the conversation, we're dealing with you and your issue and what you got going on first. And I'm not bringing up anything on my side until we are fully resolved. Your situation is fully resolved, period. That's it. Point blank, end of discussion. That's it. One at a time. Makes it less confusing, easy to understand. It just does, right? And that's not even where I was going with that, but but that is absolutely a way to make things easier, because if I'm dealing with one thing at a time, if it's already a difficult conversation, then dealing with one thing at a time makes it a lot easier to deal with it, right? Instead of having all these things jumbled together. So one topic, one situation at a time, and we don't stop. We don't stop that. So we don't move on to the other person's perspective or issue or problem until the person that's speaking and brought the topic up is fully heard, validated, and understood. Then you can summarize back to them and get confirmation from them that you fully understand where they're coming from. That's the only time you would switch. This is one thing that's going to make your conversations a lot easier, because you're able to stay on track. You're able to stay on point. All right. And these other things, they're part of that process as well, right? So move with curiosity, ask questions, try to understand where the person's coming from, right? That's what you're asking those questions. Validate them, empathize with them. Okay, I understand why that would be difficult for you. Using the example I gave in the beginning, yeah, I'll be honest, yeah, this is difficult. Hearing this, I'm really happy for your opportunity at work, but man, like I'm getting things off the ground, and I was trying to make some new connections here, and we got family here, and and been here for so long, it's just like uprooting. That's just really difficult, I validated them, confirm with them, and then we get back to the other side, right? How that's difficult for the other person. I didn't do it really cleanly, that example, but you get what I'm saying though, right? You're validating the other person, you're empathizing with them, you're summarizing to them, and then you switch, and then you start talking about how much, it's difficult for you and what you're struggling with and what you're dealing with, and plug and play whatever the situation is, right? And also, like I've said before, not every situation is going to have a take turn, right? Not every situation is going to require the other person's perspective. There's going to be lots of conversations where one person's perspective is enough, right? And understanding them and just validating them and coming to a resolution with them, that's enough. We don't have to go on and have another perspective on it at the same time. So I say all that to say, guys, if you're able to do these things, these 4 things that we talked about, again, tracking the conversation one person at a time, listen to understand. It's not about winning. Regulate your emotions. I talked about grounding. There's also breathing strategies and techniques as well, which I will say, put an asterisk next to breathing as well. You must practice breathing on a regular basis to be able to use it in a moment where you start to escalate. This is so important, because people will say breathing doesn't work, breathing doesn't work, breathing doesn't work. Again, I don't know why we throw the basic concepts out the window. Guess what? If you were playing a sport, you wouldn't just look at some tape or practice something one time right before the game and then hop in the game and expect to do well. No one would do that. You just wouldn't. If you have a speech, you wouldn't just practice it. Well, I'm just going to read over it real quick. Then I'm going to go out there and just, do it. You wouldn't do that. You would practice it over and over and over again. So we're talking about training the nervous system. You're training with breathing. You're training your nervous system so that when you breathe, your nervous system says, That means calm. I know that because we do that every single morning. When we do that 3-4-7 breathing, we relax. So when you breathe and do that, it's, oh yeah, we know that. We remember that. And it automatically triggers. If you're not practicing, it's not going to work because there's nothing for your nervous system to remember. If you practice a play one time, when you get out there in the game, when the pressure's on and things like that, your nervous system is not going to remember. A lot of those guys you see doing phenomenal things, right? That's because their nervous system remembers. It's been beaten into the nervous system for so long that not only can you do phenomenal things, it can also change things on the fly to adjust because it's so wired for that. Breathing's the exact same way. You must practice breathing on a regular basis so that when you need to use it in a stressful situation, it reminds your nervous system, that breath reminds your nervous system, calm. And then when you get calm, you're able to re-engage. You're able to check yourself. You're able to not be triggered. You're able to remain emotionally regulated. And the last thing, like I was saying, curiosity, right? Really seek to understand where the other person's coming from. Validate them, empathize with them, summarize what they're saying back to them. Do not switch places until they can confirm with you, right, that your interpretation of what they're saying is accurate. Like you fully understand where they are coming from, right? And if you need any help with any of this, guys, if you're struggling with hard conversations, or maybe you have a difficult topic you want to talk about, you don't know how to bring it up, please reach out. Reach out and let me know, right? Reach out. We could schedule a consultation, or if you want to, send an email, right? If you want to send an email, please feel free to send an email. Like all the social media has all my email address. So if you have, you can send it to info@fcstherapylasvegas.com. If you have a question or a situation or something like that, I was talking with my wife about, maybe changing the dynamic of some of these live streams, right? So maybe we can have some like call-ins, or have other people on, or maybe have one where we're just answering people's questions, right? Maybe you have a question about your relationship and it's like, well, I'm not in the same state, or I don't have the money, or I don't have the insurance, or maybe I'm just curious about what you would say about it, right? Please feel free to reach out, ask a question. I'll keep it anonymous and I'll answer it online, because I can promise you, it's just like when we're in class. They always say ask a question, because you can guarantee there are multiple other people that have that same thing going on. So also, if I don't think I have this link everywhere, but on my Linktree link on TikTok, I changed some of the links on there, right? Trying to, update it to some of the things that are going on. So I've said in some of the other live streams, I have workbooks. I have different workbooks. I have things that could help with communication. The Yes Sir couples communication workbook. I have that can help you guys with communication, you and your significant other. I also have the weekly, the Reset and Rebuild workbook, that can help you set up a weekly meeting in your relationship so you can talk about issues, keep your finger on the pulse of the relationship, and do it the right way. I also have a boundary mastery workbook, although I think I'm having trouble with the link on that one. But so if you don't see it up there, I'll get that worked out, in due time. But if you struggle with boundaries, you struggle with identifying your boundaries, you struggle with, enforcing your boundaries and teaching other people your boundaries, that workbook is going to help you tremendously. It's going to help you identify out of 9 domains. It's going to help you to identify what your boundaries are in general, right? Because we have a lot of different boundaries. There's a lot of different aspects to us. So to try to remember them all is going to be difficult. But this workbook can help you identify your main ones that you can teach other people, or start implementing, or even start thinking about, man, I didn't even think about this domain. Like, what boundaries around my time. I didn't even think about that before. Boundaries around my finances. Hopefully you thought about that one, right? So our boundaries around my spirituality, whatever the case may be. This workbook is going to help you identify what those are, set up a plan of action so you know how to enforce them the right way, that's respectful, that honors both you and the other person. All right. So with all that being said, guys, always, always, always remember, try to let you guys know every single time at the end of these live streams. Listen, always keep in mind, right? Always, that you are not alone. Help is here. Help is here. All right. Just reach out. So y'all take care. Have a great and blessed night. And I'll see y'all